Mao Zedong, The Man Who Changed China Forever, read and published by Mr. Books. In the vast tapestry of human history, few figures emerge with the force to alter the path of an entire nation. Mao Zedong's shadow stretches far beyond the borders of the land he shaped. It reaches into the fierce dreams of revolutionaries, the quiet fears of the silenced, and the day-to-day lives of hundreds of millions who dwell in a world remade by his hand. For better or worse, he is the man who changed China forever. Born into obscurity in a secluded Hunan village, Mao's early years betrayed little of the tempest that would soon engulf China. Yet, in the soft earth of Shaoshan, seeds of rebellion took root. They grew in the stagnant air of a country battered by warlords, foreign interests, and centuries of dynastic decay. Mao would become the firebrand who stoked those embers into flames that, once unleashed, could never be contained. To some, Mao was the embodiment of hope, a peasant's son who was neither born to nobles nor groomed for leadership, yet who defied his era's dogmas and rallied the restless masses. His vision was uncompromising. He offered a new order carved from the ruins of the old, and he gave voice to the voiceless, harnessing their discontent and yearning for something beyond starvation and servitude. But the pursuit of paradise is seldom soft and never simple. Mao's road to power was a river of blood, the Long March, the savage civil war, the tribulations of the Japanese invasion, and the brutal birth of a communist China. His reign ushered in sweeping campaigns that reordered society and dreams of a utopia that often spun out of control, birthing nightmares alongside progress. This book dares to step into the maelstrom of Mao's China, tracing every soaring triumph and withering tragedy left in the wake of a single man's relentless ambition. Within these pages, you will find the hopes of millions, the chilling silence of fear, the unyielding surge of willpower, and the undying echo of revolution. To know Mao Zedong is to reckon with the DNA of modern China itself. This is his story, and it is, in many ways, the story of China's agony and its astonishing rebirth, a story etched in struggle, sacrifice, and the dream to change the world forever. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Revolutionary Dreams. It was the late 19th century, a moment when the ancient lands of China trembled beneath the weight of foreign bootials and treacherous warlords. The old dynastic order was crumbling. Its faith in the mandate of heaven was gone, replaced by an ache for something unknown and new. In the southern province of Hunan, a boy named Mao Zedong entered a world fraught with hardship. Mao was born in 1893, son to a stubborn farmer with visions no bigger than the rice paddies he tilled. The household was strict, sometimes cold. His mother, gentle and devoutly Buddhist, offered what warmth she could, but it was his father's forceful discipline that imprinted itself on young Mao. He watched as landowners lunched in luxury, while common folk starved. He heard the grumblings of neighbors, hopeless and raw. These were lessons that burned. The late Qing Empire was dying. Corruption festered in officials' courts. Famine and floods scoured the fields. Secret societies murmured of republican dreams. When Mao was a child, China suffered a humiliating defeat by Japan in the First Sino-Japanese War. "Our land is wounded," elders said. "Our pride trampled." Mao listened, his heart swelling with anger and shame. Schooling, when he received it, was a battleground for his restless mind. He tasted the classics, yet felt constricted by their ancient maxims. Confucian orthodoxy, with its suffocating hierarchy, seemed only to perpetuate misery. As he grew, the world beyond Shaoshan beckoned a world in tumult, stirred by Western ideas, doctrine, and the thunder of rebellion. 1911 marked the end of more than 2,000 years of emperors. The Qing dynasty collapsed, and the Republic of China was declared. Amid the confusion, Mao, barely out of his teens, traveled to Changsha. There, the city throbbed with possibility. Newspapers blared radical new concepts: democracy, science, revolution. Mao devoured everything he could: books, manifestos, the stories of change sweeping the globe. Discontent was contagious. Mao became involved in student activism, challenging old taboos, stirring debate. He founded societies, penned essays. The ideas of Marx and Lenin, the thundering call for class struggle, began to take root in his thoughts. Intertwined with a deep-seated conviction, China, his broken homeland, deserved better. But it would not come freely. It would come only through the crucible of transformation, something magnificent and terrible. His revolutionary dreams, conceived in the quiet desperation of his youth, called him forward on a path of uncertainty and fire, a path that would, in time, draw the whole of China in its wake. Chapter 2: The Seeds of Rebellion. If Shaoshan was a cradle of hardship, Changsha was the furnace that forged Mao's rebellion. The city was seething, alive with the energy of students and workers who questioned everything. Here, Mao honed his intellect, his beliefs, his sense of purpose, and his will. Mao's sojourn in Changsha coincided with the May 4th movement, a wave of nationalistic and anti-imperialist protests that swept through China in 1919. When news of the Treaty of Versailles reached China, and it was revealed that Chinese territories previously controlled by Germany would fall into Japanese hands, outrage ignited. The youth rose up. Mao, then a young librarian at Peking University, found himself, for the first time, among the vanguards of change. He saw, firsthand, the collision of old and new worlds. Traditionalists called for a return to Confucian order. The revolutionaries demanded that China be reborn from its ashes. Mao gravitated toward the latter. He wrote impassioned articles, denouncing the subjugation of China's people and the limp acquiescence of her leaders. He mingled with firebrands, stirred by the Bolshevik victory in Russia, and saw in Marxism the possibility of China's salvation without the taint of Western imperialism. These were not just politics for Mao, they were revelations. The May 4th movement revealed the ferocity of the youth, the simmering potential of the peasants and workers. Yet, in the salons of intellectuals, Mao also learned the limitations of debate. He recognized a chasm that separated thought from action, a chasm he intended to bridge. As China's cities grappled with their future, the countryside languished, unnoticed. But Mao had not forgotten his origins. He understood that true revolution, in a land where 90% of people toiled in fields, could not be urban only. His writings began to stress the importance of peasants as the real engine of change. Rural, ignored, and seething with resentment, they held the key to China's transformation. In 1921, Mao became one of the founding members of the Chinese Communist Party. CCP meeting in secret with a small group in a Shanghai girls' school. In the darkness of fear and threat from authorities, a tiny movement was born, one that Mao believed would grow into an unstoppable force. Rebellion no longer resided in conversation. It lived in the clandestine organization, in the recruitment of the disaffected, and in the relentless vision of men who would reshape destiny. Mao threw himself into the cause. He traveled, organized, argued, fought, his energy inexhaustible, his faith unwavering. The seeds of revolution were scattered across China. Mao intended to nurture them with everything he had, knowing that harvest would be years, perhaps decades, in coming. Every defeat strengthened his resolve. Every betrayal clarified his purpose. The battle lines were drawn not just against warlords and governments, but against the deep-rooted injustice etched into China's soul. Through sweat and sacrifice, Mao's dream of rebellion began, at last to flower. Chapter 3. The March of Destiny. Destiny does not wait. It surged forward with the chill of uncertainty and the promise of greatness. The 1920 SE in China were turbulent years, marked by the struggle for legitimacy, power, and the ability to shape the soul of a wounded nation. The Chinese Communist Party remained small but determined, overshadowed by the far larger and better-armed Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, KMT, led by the charismatic Sun Yat-sen and later Chiang Kai-shek. Early on, the possibility of united revolution shimmered on the horizon. Encouraged by Soviet advisors, the Communists and Nationalists formed the first united front, joining hands to rid China of warlords and forge a united republic. Mao played his part, traveling to remote villages, mobilizing peasants, honing the art of organization. In the rural heartland, his words resonated. The peasant movement is a raging storm. It was here that Mao first recognized the latent power of the countryside, the might that slept in the mud-brick homes of China's millions. But alliances, thin as spring ice, seldom held. After Sun Yat-sen's death, the KMT looked askance at their leftist allies. Chiang Kai-shek, relentless and suspicious, decided that the communists were a threat to unity, not its salvation. In 1927, with a swift and terrible violence, the KMT turned on the communists in what would be known as the Shanghai Massacre. Thousands were slaughtered. The fledgling party was nearly destroyed. Amid the bloodshed, Mao did not falter. He vanished into the countryside, escaped assassination, and began to feed the revolution with a new strategy. War would not be waged from the cities, but from the mountains and fields. Here, amid the poverty and isolation of Jiangxi province, Mao began to build a Red Army. He pioneered guerrilla tactics: strike, vanish, return. He encouraged his followers. A single spark can start a prairie fire. The communists carved out a base area, a sanctuary, known as the Jiangxi Soviet. Mao introduced radical reforms. Land was taken from landlords and given to the peasants. Women were granted new rights. For the first time, those at the bottom glimpsed a different future. But the nationalists, determined to crush rebellion, launched one campaign after another, encirclements of steel and flame. Trapped, Mao made a decision that would define his legend: the Long March. In 1934, some 86,000 men, women, and children set out into the unknown, harried and hunted, their numbers dwindling with every passing mile. Across mountains, rivers, and endless hardship, Mao's perseverance became mythic. The trek was a crucible. Those who survived became the backbone of a revolution forged by pain. By its end, only a fraction of the marchers remained, but their spirit was unbroken, tempered by loss, animated by an unshakable sense of destiny. Mao had emerged indisputable leader of the movement, his legitimacy cemented in sacrifice. The March of Destiny was not merely a journey, it was a transformation. The ragged survivors became bearers of hope, the heralds of a China not yet born. Through suffering, they had found purpose. Through endurance, Mao had claimed his place in history, the fateful architect of a revolution that refused to die. Chapter 4. Chasing the Red Star. The Long March ended, but the struggle did not. Mao and his survivors emerged in the wilds of northern Jiangxi, battered yet fiercely determined. The spirit that kept them on their feet through a year of impossible hardships became the fire that would blaze through China's next, more perilous chapter. Now, as the 1930s waned, a new threat darkened the land, the advancing shadow of imperial Japan. The rape of Nanjing, the sacking of towns and cities, the imposition of terror upon the Chinese people, these became the terrible reality against which both nationalists and communists were forced to rally. Mao, always a master of turning crisis into opportunity, saw the moment for the Communist Party to reinvent itself, not as a radical splinter, but as the vanguard of national resistance. In caves, hollowed from red earth at Hunan, Mao and his followers built not just a base, but a life. There were lessons and lectures, songs and propaganda, moments of hunger and determined hope. The Red Army became the 8th Root Army, swelling with new recruits, many of them farmers and workers who fled the chaos of war. Here, Mao began to shape the party and the army in his image insistent on ideological purity, relentless in discipline, yet promoting egalitarian camaraderie. Soldiers and officers shared hardships and meals equally. Peasants, newly empowered, became the focus of party outreach and reform. The myth of the People's Army was born, yet the path remained treacherous. The uneasy alliance with Chiang Kai-shek's KMT frayed at every turn, as both sides viewed the Japanese and each other with suspicion and loathing. Political maneuvering, espionage, assassinations, these undercurrents threatened to undermine the fragile unity of resistance. Still, Mao's vision broadened. The party reached deep into the hearts of the countryside, winning trust through land reform and anti-Japanese activism. Schools and hospitals appeared. Teachers and doctors spread literacy and basic medicine. The communist promise shifted from distant ideology to tangible if modest improvements in daily life. With each village that joined, Mao and his comrades chased the Red Star across the map of a devastated nation. But the pursuit came with heavy costs. Internal purges swept through party ranks as Mao intensified his grip on power, eliminating real or imagined rivals. The movement could afford no weakness. All must march beneath the same banners or be cast aside. In this crucible, Mao's persona became ever more formidable, a leader who inspired fierce loyalty and even fiercer fear. When at last, the tide of war changed and Japan surrendered in 1945, Mao Zedong and the Communist Party stood poised on the threshold of victory. The nation lay in tatters, exhausted by decades of horror. Yet, among the ruins, an idea had taken root, the dream that China could be reborn, led by those who had suffered for her, those who had chased the Red Star across an endless horizon. Certainly, I will proceed by following your instructions step by step, using the keywords and information you provided, and imagining a creative, emotional, and captivating book in English, but with an invented, captivating Chinese title for flair. Chapter 5. A New China Awakens. The dawn of October 1, 1949, painted the Tiananmen sky with hues of promise. Crowds surged onto Beijing's broad avenues, hearts and banners held aloft. They came not merely to witness history, but to become it as Mao Zedong mounted the rostrum and declared, "The Chinese people have stood up." For centuries, China had been subjugated by dynasts, foreign invaders, and warlords, buffeted by famine and humiliation. Now, under the red banner, a new epoch stirred awake. In villages where peasants had once toiled under landlord's lash, land was redistributed amid ceremonies blending justice and vengeance. In factories, red armbands signaled the workers' leap into ownership and destiny. But building a new China was more than slogan chanting and parades. It meant tearing down the old temples, hierarchies, silences, and forging the new through vision and improvisation. Schools filled with barefoot children, learning revolutionary songs and simplified characters. Women, unbound from lotus shoes, stepped out into village councils, holding their heads and their voices high. The sense of possibility was intoxicating. We finally belonged to ourselves, sang workers as poetry blossomed in steel towns and on collective farms. Yet the euphoria was laced with anxiety. Political campaigns against counter-revolutionaries and enemies of the people swept through the streets. Yesterday's allies could be tomorrow's suspects. Trials were held in town squares. Fear slithered under doors at midnight. Mao's vision for China knew no half measures. Mass mobilization was the pulse of the new society. Every citizen was summoned to participate, to surveil, denounce, confess, or lead. Cadres scurried from governorships to pigsties, preaching, organizing, and sometimes persecuting. The land reforms, radical and swift, overturned millennia of feudal power. Yet the redistribution was not without cost. Rightful anger sometimes spilled into chaos, settling old scores under the guise of revolution. Thousands landlords and the simply unlucky lost more than their fields. Industry, too, underwent metamorphosis. Soviet expertise arrived like brisk winds engineers. Blueprints, pilot factories, and the mantra of surpass Britain in 15 years seized the imagination of millions. New railways cross-stitched the country. Smokestacks and dam projects rose with a sense of urgent destiny. In the cities, life was transformed. Beggars vanished sometimes into jobs, sometimes into re-education brigades. Marriage laws, once the shackle of girls sold in childhood, now enshrined the freedom to love or to leave. The air rang with the laughter and unease of new beginnings. There were setbacks, of course. Food shortages flickered in the countryside, and old habits proved stubborn enemies. Outside China's borders, foreign powers watched nervously and sometimes menacingly. War clouds soon gathered over the Korean peninsula, and young men departed, their trains crowded with banners, songs, and the silent fear of mothers. In every corner of the country, Mao's portrait presided over transformation, sometimes hopeful, sometimes haunted. From the cracked tiles of ancient lanes to the glassy new ministries in Beijing, the spirit of revolution ricocheted. Was it freedom or frenzy? Was it birth or undoing? These questions murmured in the starlit courtyards and echoed across the rice paddies as a new China stretched and stumbled into dawn. For better or worse, a nation had awakened. Under Mao's calloused hand and singular vision, 1949 was both an exhalation of centuries of suffering and the first breath of a future for which no one, not even Mao, could fully foresee the cost. Chapter 6. In the shadow of the Great Leap. The victory festivals had scarcely faded when Mao Zedong called for more than mere rebirth. The time had come, he announced, for the great leap forward. The past was a prologue. China must leap over centuries of backwardness in a single bound. In 1958, the countryside came alive with the clang of ambition. Villages merged to form gigantic communes, each a miniature state, with its own militias, mess halls, nurseries, and endless echoing meetings. Grain quotas rose impossibly high. Steel targets soared higher. Young and old melted family woks to feed backyard furnaces, stoking flames that dulled the stars. The air was thick with exhortation. Surpass Britain within 15 years. Slogans were painted on every wall, every mind. Work points replaced wages. Labor became a fever dream, rest a betrayal. But this leap, so heavy with hope, cast a vast and terrible shadow. Beneath the triumphal rhetoric, harvests shrank behind propaganda's mask. Fields, stripped bare by untested agricultural schemes, could not yield what Mao and his lieutenants had promised. Still, no one dared contradict the chairman, not allowed. Soon, nightmares invaded the noon heat. Ration lines snaked into infinity. Children's ribs pressed through skin like drumsticks. Parents exchanged bitter, silent glances at empty rice bowls. In the villages of Anhui and Hunan, the old would creep from their beds at night to dig for edible roots, gnawing bark or chewing leather. Famine crept from province to province, concealed by lies and pride. The party sent out teams to correct wrong thinking and to confiscate the last handfuls of hoarded grain. Warnings were issued, denials broadcasted, while reports describing millions starving trickled, then spilled, into the center's ears. Local officials, terrified, reported harvests that never existed and deaths that could not be denied. By the early 1960 ES, as many as 45 million lives would fade in silence, the largest man-made famine in recorded history. China staggered, families dissolved, hope curdled into bitterness. It was not merely a tragedy of numbers. In the cold winter of the leap, ancient bonds of trust dissolved. Neighbors accused neighbors. Mothers wailed over shrunken children. Elders, parched of dignity, begged for scraps from party canteens. Faith in government, so recently born, fractured on the anvil of hunger. Yet amidst despair, glimmers of the old Chinese resilience endured. Some local cadres bent rules to feed the starving. Others snuck food to the condemned. In battered villages, old stories were told over guttering lanterns of past famine, rebellion, survival. When finally pressed by fellow leaders, Liu Shaoqi, Zhu Enlai Mao relented, if only partially, retreating from day-to-day administration. "It is not a victory, but a lesson," Zhu murmured, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The party, battered but not broken, stepped back from the edge. Smaller communes revived private plots, a partial return to sanity. Yet the scars of the leap endured. Trust was elusive, fear thickened in public meetings, and Mao, wounded but not defeated, withdrew. His vision unsurrendered, his suspicions deepened. The stage was set, in this long, lethal shadow, for the next storm. Chapter 7. The Wrath and Redemption of the Cultural Revolution. It began, not as a policy, but a thunderclapper call to arms, against invisible enemies, a purification of revolution itself. The Great Leap had broken more than bodies. It had splintered faith in Mao. He would reclaim that faith with fire. In 1966, the Cultural Revolution erupted. The party, Mao declared, had fallen into the hands of capitalist roaders. The torch of revolution must not pass into forgetfulness. It must incinerate complacency, privilege, hypocrisy. Across China, millions of students became Red Guards, sworn to preserve the purity of Mao's thought. Beijing's streets became rivers of chanting youth, armbands crimson against drab uniforms. Teachers were paraded with dunce caps, intellectuals knelt in shame. Ancient relics met the sledgehammer's kiss. Destroy the four olds. The Red Guards screamed old customs, culture, habits, and ideas. The past was not merely to be ignored, but annihilated. Pain spread like wildfire. Friendships fractured under suspicion. Parents feared their children's denunciations. Even party veterans, heroes of war and revolution, trudged through self-confession sessions. Eyes hollow, submitting recantations, written by trembling hands. The country convulsed. Universities shuttered. Libraries burned. The opera reinvented as revolutionary ballet. Blood was not symbolic. In some provinces, violence reached frenzy: street battles, executions, famine-born, not of drought, but social chaos. Yet, in the swirling ashes, twisted seeds of redemption glimmered. Young people, sent down to the countryside to learn from the peasants, faced lives of hardship and humility, and sometimes solidarity. In the hinterlands, a new generation, stripped of privilege, learned the realities beneath ideology. Those who survived the madness sometimes found unexpected kinship in shared adversity. Within the ranks of power, hell unfolded. Liu Shaoqi, once Mao's right hand, was denounced and left to die unattended, a ghost in a rotting cell. Zhu Enlai danced on the razor's edge, moderating, softening, pleading for reason, even as he clapped to the Red Guard's din. And all along, Mao loomed remote yet omniscient, orchestrating purges with a poet's grandeur and a general's ruthlessness. To some, he was a betrayed father, restoring the revolution's soul. To others, He was the architect of a nightmare without end. But as years passed, exhaustion seeped into the masses. Even Mao's old comrades, scarred and shaken, called for order. The army was summoned. The chaos receded slowly, unevenly, amid tears and weary celebrations. China had torn itself asunder and sewn itself together again, with wounds that would not heal for generations. For some, the Cultural Revolution was trauma without meaning. For others, redemption only came as the fever broke and reality, grim but real, re-emerged in the 1970s. Mao, aged and declining, would not long outlive his dream of endless revolution. His portrait remained, staring unblinking from Tiananmen, but the nation he had purged and punished now yearned for respite, for bread over banners, forgiveness over fury. Chapter 8. The Echoes of an Immortal Legacy. When Mao Zedong breathed his last, on a humid morning in September 1976, a hush plunged over a third of humanity. Sirens keened, black armbands blossomed like bruises in every city. In schoolyards and factories, people bowed their heads, some in genuine grief, many in complex relief, confusion, or quiet hope. What had Mao left behind? A people's republic risen from civil war's ashes. A society shot through with equality and scars. Streets filled with the dreams and traumas of the Red Era, and minds forever split between reverence and regret. China did not collapse. Instead, paradoxically liberated by his passing, the country awakened again cautiously, slowly, like a wounded giant stretching. Deng Xiaoping and other survivors picked through Mao's tangled legacy, distilling what could be salvaged: mass literacy, social equality, a foreign policy that had forced open closed doors. But the question looms still, vast as the go-by: was the suffering worth it? The echoes of the Cultural Revolution, the hunger of the Great Leap, the violence of land reform, these were not easily swept aside. Families whispered their wounds. In many villages, old graves remained unmarked, tales untold. Yet Mao's shadow was not only a monument to tragedy. To millions, he remains the man who humbled foreign invaders, restored dignity to the forgotten, and planted ideals that would, after decades, fuel prosperity. The streets where he once rallied peasants are now fringed with skyscrapers, cell phones, and neon. Statues of his boyhood self still stand sentinel, their granite eyes overlooking cities far more prosperous than he ever imagined. In art, debate, and memory, Mao survives. Teachers quote his poems, generals invoke his tactics, party leaders, even those who push market reforms, still seek his blessing, at least ritually, sometimes uneasily. Youthful faces glance up at his image in Tiananmen Square, torn between amusement and awe, unsure whether to curse or to thank. Immortal legacy, this is what Mao Zedong sought. Yet, in the end, immortality is not merely the persistence of his image. It is the uneasy dialogue between generations. How do we build without forgetting? How do we remember without being dragged backward? The answers remain uncertain, the arguments unresolved. But this much is clear: Mao Zedong changed China forever. The Red Star burns on not only in banners and anthems, but in the restless striving of a people still seeking their place in the sun. In every protest and prayer, every market and monument, his revolution's double-edged legacy echoes, ricochets, and, sometimes, inspires. This is the story of a man, a movement, and a century, a story, both cautionary and magnificent, written in the blood and hope of a billion lives, still unfolding beneath the eternal Red Star. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.